Alright, so we're going to try something a little different here versus what we've done before. So, versus other leagues, I've actually decided to level up the EK Ignite Elementalist so that I can show you guys what it actually looks like. And do an act-by-act leveling guide, which will be attached to this video. So I thought, we're at the end of Act 10, let's just go smash Kitava and have a look and see what this looks like. So, a bit of like gameplay on this, and also like there's nothing crazy on here. It's got a pyre, it's got a Kikazoo, which generally drop. If you can't get them to drop, then just use the 1 or 2 C that you'll generate in the campaign on League Start to buy them. It uses an Elevor as well. Really good starting item. This guy is really bad to fight for this character. And now it does have a tabula. Someone will be like, whoa, that's a tabula. Well, if you don't have a tabby, it's a 5-link. And if you can't get a 5-link, just take out one of the gems. And you'll be good. Some people will say level up EK Ignite with Wave of Conviction. You're welcome to do that, but you don't need to, because EK Ignite just works once you get Shaper of Flames. Now, you won't have a Taste of Hate, but a level with your Taste of Hate doesn't do anything on this build realistically. It does, but it doesn't. Now, here we'll definitely die. And we'll probably die here. Because I don't have any resistances to that. That's all good. That's made to kill you. Alright, there we go. Pretty painless, to be honest with you. So anyway, let's get into the video and I'll talk you through this. Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, what are we talking about today? Well, obviously the 3.21 patch notes have now dropped, League has been announced, and we're looking at one of the craziest power spikes with the now skill tree built into your individual items, i.e. built into your literal individual items, being your either shield or wand, or in this case, bow, and quivers don't get the buff, unfortunately, because bow's treated as two-handed. Anyway, whatever. So, what are we looking at? Well, I decided to embark on an adventure to set up a at least moderately decent EK Knife Ignite Elementalist tree from a League Start perspective. Now, to give you an optic as to how played this build was last League, where it was quite popular, we'll just pull this up. So, about 3% of the League played this, somewhere in the vicinity of that. 96% were obviously, you know, Elementalists, and then a varied amount of other classes throughout. So at League Start, if we look at this, like within the first 2 days of League, is usually a good sort of optic. You know, we can just go down, what was it, Ethereal Knives. So about 2% of everybody was playing Ethereal Knives to varying degrees of, you know, I guess, power. So, as an overall, as far as being a really good skill to sort of scale on, just to go into, let's go to the level 93 after day 2. So, basically, on day 1, day 2, avoid of these Grand Spectrum gems being in existence, it's quite a powerful skill to level up. Part of that is Ignite, catches your enemy on fire, and then if you've got Fan the Flames, or in this case you've got it into your gloves, and this guy doesn't have it in his gloves, he'll have probably Fan the Flame. There we go, Fan the Flames. See, told you. You can pretty much wipe entire maps, and you can absolutely destroy bosses in no time. Now, one of the best things about this build, defensively wise, and we'll talk about this when we sort of get into it, is the fact that it uses spell suppression and it uses avoidance of elemental ailments. And the other side of that is we would end up pretty much, as we get to, you know, where I am currently with it, you would end up with Mind Over Matter. You would run a Devouring Diadem once you can get your hands on that, or anything with ES on it in your helm. and you would mitigate 40% of the damage taken from physical against your energy shield pool, which will be sitting over your mana, because we run mind over mana, and we run a shitload of auras to buff ourselves up. Now, the builds that I'll show you will more be tailored towards delve play, because this build can go down to about 600-700 delve. On average, there was one player that didn't play the Ignite variation that went down 2,000 plus. But the builds I'll show you went down to about 600-700 without using things like Mage Blood, which, no brainer, would give you a huge power spike, and you can take it as far as you want to do that if you want to do that, but realistically you don't need to. So fundamentally, the way that this works is you use Fan of Flames, you catch one enemy on fire or however many enemies on fire using EK knives, right? Ethereal knives, when it's EK, ethereal knives, and then that lights everything up. Now, the part of this that gets really sort of awesome, and it's enabling from Act 3, is the Ascendancy on the Elementalist. Once you complete Act 3 and the Ascendancy, you get Hits Always Ignite, which means that your EK always ignites, you don't have to stack Ignite chance. So you just basically scale Fire Dot up, and the other side of this is you also run Breath of the Rime, because one of the other synergies here is we run Cold to Fire support, and then basically we would run Hatred, and then which will convert your physical damage from your Ethereal Knives, which is a physical damage spell skill, and then that will then in return buff up your cold damage. And then once you convert your cold damage using Cold to Fire, which converts about 50%, and we use the Mastery Point 40% physical damage converted to cold, you get about 90% conversion to cold without doing any other things in the tree or on the character. And then obviously I'm running a Pyre here as well, which does, converts cold damage to fire damage as well, which reconverts your damage. But anyway, we'll talk about that when we get to that. Then basically you end up converting all the damage that stacks on your physical spell skill into your fire damage, which then scales up with your existing fire dot, which then scales up the effect of your ignites. And where this gets even more hectic is when you introduce things like Gloomfang, which then converts your elemental, or doesn't convert it, it adds on an additional component of chaos damage based on your elemental damage. And we have an example of Gloomfang here, which projectiles that have chained gain 42% of non-chaos damage as extra chaos damage, which stacks up a huge amount of damage because Ignite is all non-chaos damage, and we're converting 42% of that to chaos damage, for example. And that's one of the reasons why this is so powerful. Now, from a league start standpoint, the other thing is it's really easy to level up. So by design, I've got a tabular in here. Somebody will be like, oh, you're using a tabular, that's not realistic, but get over yourself. So basically, I'm using a tabular in a 5-link with shitty gems that haven't been leveled to shit. And this is what the tree represents too, act by act, showing you what you need to level up. And actually, the tree that I've got is a 4-link, so shut up about using a tabular. Now, Elevore drops all the time. It drops like a purple filter if you use Neversink. Really easy item to get. Absolutely no-brainer. The advantage is early spell suppression, early elemental ailment avoidance, and life. You recover life when you suppress skills. This is actually a really good item to take in early mapping until you can get a devouring diadem or something a little better. Either that or use a gold rim. It's up to you. I preferred this. This made this character really easy to level up. Now, for argument's sake, I just did Kitava with a Life Sprig and Kalkenholt, which are absolutely crap items, like no-brainer items from leveling up, but it works with that. Now, I've got a Kikazoo, you don't need that. I've got a Pyre, you realistically don't need that. You could get away without that easily enough. Honestly, 1C item, you get 1C drop, just go buy it on the market, or 2C drops as you do the campaign, or run a few bloody blood aqueducts, get some currency up, like tops of 5C from the campaign as you level up on day one. Get a few of these items, and it'll just make your life really easy. Everything else is just based on drops, and I got a Wanderlust in there because it's a leveling item. Like, it's like a 5C item day one, and it's not hard to get 5C. Now, Taste to Hate, just ignore that. I put that in there for the lols. And basically that's about it for leveling. Like there's no other jewels or anything. There's no anything in this. It just leveled through the campaign nice and easily. It's like 6-7 hour campaign leveling with this. It's not a speedrun character, but I didn't really die a lot. I died a few times, but I didn't get to a point where I got like super frustrated when I was playing. Now, the other thing that you're going to want to do as you're leveling a character like this, or any character, if you can get your hands on it early, is a Ridgewald's Crest. This is just going to speed you through the campaign like nothing else, because Spectral Wolf stacking in early game up to like level Act 6, 7 is just freaking powerful, and it also helps you get your lab done really quickly as well. So if you can get your hands on one of these early on day one, then get one, play it for a bit, and keep it there in case you play any other characters or anything like that. Anyway, that's a bit of an introduction to what we're playing here. Ultimately, this doesn't represent like what your mapping spec's going to be. The leveling guide that I'll put up and that I'll show you very shortly in early leveling is basically designed just to give you a bit of a schematic of how to scale this build to get it to work. But everybody's experience is going to be different because you're going to get different drops. Day one's always different for everybody. So don't hold me to it. It works. I tested it. I tested it on stream. Beyond that point, then you'll be targeting the chase items you need to get to the next level, which I'll have a tree for, which is like a medium level for mapping. And that gets you to like 4.4, 4.5 mil dot for Fire Ignite. And then beyond that will be the big kahuna endgame tree, which I'll provide to you, which is more min and max. However, the tree that I've got here for that, it gets you to like 23 million DPS, and we'll talk about that as well. But won't break the bank because there's no mage bloods, no headhunters, none of that shit. So anyway, we'll get into that. Now, the thing that's not going to be addressed here is the skill setups or the skill trees within the items. I've got no idea how powerful that's going to be right now, but that's just going to be added power. So potentially as you're leveling up, you'll be able to buff this character's ignite up even more, depending on the skill tree that you get on the wands that you bring in, or scepters if you want. And endgame could be just aberrantly, crazily more powerful than what this is even showing here. So I can't speak to that. I don't know how that's going to work. But that's going to be absolutely crazy. So anyway, let's get into the mechanics, and I'll explain to you sort of how this build works at the end game, or at the moderate tree level, and then we'll talk about the leveling sort of tree. I don't want to go into the mechanics in the leveling tree because it's irrelevant, but I'll talk through the sort of mid-tier level build and how everything works, and then I'll talk through, I'll talk through the end game tree so you can get a bit of an optic to how the build works mechanically, and then we'll go into the leveling as we go through the acts, and then we'll go into what the moderate tree looks like, and then I'll give you the end game tree as well. Anyway, let's get into the video. Okay, so before you start leveling a build or you're playing a build, one of the things you need to understand is the mechanics around the build. So I decided actually off the back of what I was just saying that I would run you through the moderate tree, right? The end game tree that I've got sitting here that pushes depth 600 plus, that'll get you to about 22 million DPS, but that'll also account for convergence being on as well, and you basically applying every element under the sun, because this is an endgame tree. And the thing that somebody's going to sit in this channel and say is, well, Jorgen, you won't be able to get to endgame and this tree won't be achievable. Yeah, I'm very well aware of that. That's why I'm not even going to talk about that tree right now. So anyway, and all these trees will be in the description for you as well. So you get a bit of an idea of what this build will look like. This tree was taken from a build at the 3-week mark, right? And slightly adjusted for defenses and chaos to make it a bit tankier to deal with delve and whatever. And so we have an effective hit pool of about 73,000. But talking about the mechanics in the build is really important. So one of the things in these that I like to do with these trees, especially at League Stars, just talk you through the screen, because then you know it's not bullshit. So anyway, we get to about 4.7 million ignite dot, and this is setup actually uses an obliteration wand, so you get that explodey sort of effect. Devouring Diadem, Skin of the Lords with less shade, which is not the right less shade to use. And basically the items are pretty craftable. The one thing you need to keep in mind is you need to just have spell suppression on every single item. When you get into mapping, you're looking for spell suppression, resistance, evasion, and life, basically on everything. This does use Gloomfang. You're not going to get that straight away. You're going to get that as you level up. Now, if it's anything like last league, it's probably going to be quite powerful, and so it'll cost a little bit. I don't know what it's going to cost yet. Nobody does. We'll find out in the first days of the market. That's why I'm not putting this as a league starter item, but you can sub this out for something else in the meantime until you get this, but your ignites will still work, and this will probably be the first item to target when you get out of, you know, campaign and mapping. This does use a pyre, but that's not the best endgame unique for this. The best endgame unique rig is going to be a replica Emberwake and a Polaric Devastation, but, you know, this has got to be achievable, and a pyre is a nice cheap item. Everything else can be basically crafted or bought for dirt cheap on the market within the first few days. So there's like nothing crazy about this build. Now, the one thing that you will notice is chance to avoid shock is really important on this, and that's because we use Storm Shroud throughout this whole build through into endgame. The reason why we use Storm Shroud is this goes modifiers to chance to avoid shock apply to all elemental ailments, and avoid shock's really easy to get on Hypnotic Eyes or any sort of Abyssal Eye or Abyssal Jewel that you can get your hands on. So in this case, like, instead of having to run Purity of Elements, you just basically run this, and Storm Shroud allows it to spread across the entirety of your build, and you just stack your Elemental Ailment Avoidance through using Storm Shroud. Really easy way to get around that. There's actually a new gem that does this for all Elemental Resistances, all Elemental Ailments in the new League content, but we'll sort of look at that when that comes out to see that interaction. For now, this works, and this is tried and true. So that basically gives you defensive layering to negate the effects of elemental ailments, which is something that's really important in the build. The other thing that this build does, you'll notice all the gearing options, they use, except for the helm and except for the body armor, they use spell suppression and a combination of evasion and or armor. Now, this is all evasive gear from what I can see here. But generally, you want armor and evasion on all of your gear through here, because we're going to use determination, and then eventually we're going to double stack grace and determination and run both auras at the same time. And where this builds defense is spell suppression, conversion and damage to mana, which then affects your ES pool. And because we run, we'll be running Eldritch Battery in the leveling tree until we get a Devouring Diadem, and then Devouring Diadem gives us Eldritch Battery. Then basically what will happen in the combination of running Mind Over Matter and Eldritch Battery is 40% of your inbound damage will hit your mana pool, and then we would run Wicked Ward as well, and then that will just continually recharge as you're casting your EK. So you'll never have to worry about your mana running or your ES pool running out, which will cover off on your mana, and then basically you just can take an absolute shit ton of damage that way, and that'll give you an extra like 1600 to 1800 ES, right? Or pool, mana pool, if you want to look at it like that, which 40% of the damage to there is whatever the 40% of that's for 800, 750, something like that. And then on top of that, we run a pretty fair amount of armor. So in this case, we have like 26,000 armor on this tree. We have about nearly 9,000 evasion on this tree as well. So it's a combination of the two. And then we run close to 100% spell suppression on this build, which, you know, reduces, so 50% of that reduces the effect of spells on your character. And there's plenty of like mitigators like critical resistance, 100% critical damage reduction and whatnot that can come from that as well. So defensive layering wise, it's quite powerful. And then, you know, we also do things like ignite 2% of life recovered when you ignite a new enemy. In particular, this is really useful for delve and mapping because you want to always be igniting new enemies. And the more that you stack your ignite up, you'll get that life back as you sort of run through, and then you're mitigating damage. So a lot of this build is really around the effective hit pool is misleading because it's about damage mitigation. Now, the other thing that I did with this is also max out the amount of chaos resistances to 75 as well, and we take this chaos resist node here, and this basically supplements all resistances and chaos res up to max chaos res. So all resistances plus max chaos res will get this working. Now this is a level 95 tree, and the gems and skills are leveled up a little bit in this. It does use awakens. You can reduce that out, so you know someone would be like, oh, you shouldn't be using awakens, so we can drop that. Pardon me. So we'll take that out just for argument's sake. So you would get to like whatever, and you probably don't even have an empower that hefty. So, you know, once you get an empower to level 3, actually, you know what, it might be level 2, okay? So once you get that to like, we'll leave it at level 3 because this is more a target tree to get to. And in the meantime, you could stack something else for Empower, or you could just start leveling up an Empower if you can get one early on. But you could sub that out for anything. If you're not using it, your damage obviously goes down, but I'll leave that up to you guys to figure out. The other thing to bear in mind too is this does use a shitty item setup with Obliteration Wand, so you could buff up the damage significantly by using any one with fire damage and fire dot, and +1 or probably +1 to fire skill gems, fire spell skill gems, and that will give you a huge damage buff as well. So those are just some of the things to keep in mind with this particular build too. So this tree was taken at 3-week point. And so if we look at configuration on this tree, like major gods, you're probably going to want like Lunaris if you're playing Delve, and you're going to want like, what are we going to play? Grathkul potentially, or, you know, I like Aberith, especially in Delve, but, you know, if we've got ailment immunity, then this will be good enough, Grathkul. And then basically throughout here, we've got Convergence, which gives us a pretty big damage spike, and Convergence comes from the Ascendancy, so that comes from Heart of Destruction, and that gives you a pretty significant damage boost. Highest damage dealt is always going to be fire damage, and then basically Arcanist brand we use to apply our curses in this particular case. Guardian and Pinnacle Boss DPS. If you look at League Starter builds, do not look at any League Starter build that does not have this, because it's a waste of time looking at it. And then basically enemies ignited, enemies chilled, because there'll be some cold damage within the build. Fire exposure does absolutely nothing on this build. If you can get Ash on this, cover enemies in Ash in this build, and that you get generally with Polaric Devastation, then absolutely you can tick that on. Enemy bleeding has no consequence, and you know, skills chain, bam, we get an additional amount of damage, and the reason why is off of the Gloomfang. So we do 42% of non-chaos damage as extra chaos damage, based on the Gloomfang chaining, and that basically, so if we have a look at Gloomfang again, sorry, projectiles that have chained, so as long as projectiles chain, and Ethereal Knives tends to chain, so what we got here, does not say that it chains, but it chains, and if you can get somewhere where you can have more chain damage, or chain effect, then bam, you can get Ethereal Knives chain, but as I was playing, Ethereal Knives just natively chains anyway. Then basically, sorry, just to get posterity there. Yeah, so skills chain +1 times 2. Sorry, I take that back. The Gloomfang gives you +1 times chain anyway. So it's pretty powerful. And that's basically going to give you a huge damage buff up as you play through. Now, Consecrated Ground, you can get a skill jewel that does that as well, or a jewel, sorry, that does that now, but that's quite expensive. Anyway, this is a good like baseline to work towards once you get out of mapping, and if you can get these items here, then we move into the next layer of the mechanics of this build, which we'll talk about after. But how do we get to this point? That's the question you might be asking. So let's have a look at the leveling tree and talk about that. Okay, so in the description below, you will see 3 trees. You'll see this tree, which is the leveling tree. You will see the tree I just showed you, which is like the, you know, moderate sort of mapping endgame-ish tree within the first couple of weeks, and you'll see the final big Giga Chad endgame tree that will take you through to potentially killing Ubers, or going down to 600 depth and delve, and everything else in between. Now, as you're leveling up, the way that I've set this tree is this has all 10 acts in it at this stage, and it will show you act by act what to level. So the other thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you click the skills for the act. So I've calibrated every single act skills that you need to have and adjusted their level. So I've actually done a bit of work this time. For anyone who says you haven't provided enough information, I'll be doing the same with another build that's I'm keeping a secret right now, because it's going to be awesome, hopefully, with the changes, and I'm keen to take a risk on League launch. I was originally going to play this on League launch, but now I've changed my mind because of the new system. It's going to be awesome. And also the other thing is I've scaled the items as well, so you know what items to get. Now, you don't need to get a tabula or anything like that. Like, you won't necessarily get those straight up on League launch, but this is just a bit of an idea of what you need to have. Now, what you'll notice is the items don't really change from up until Act 10. From maybe like Act 5 or 6, they basically just stay exactly the same. And that's by design. You'll get better items as you level up. But anyway, starting from Act 1, pretty much you're going to get, move up to like Firewalker, get a little bit of recovery, get heart and soul. Now, in the notes, you'll also see I've told you what you should do skill-wise. Now, I originally leveled this with Absolution from Act 1 to Act 3, but Wave of Conviction and Combustion are fine to level up, and you'll see that in the skill setups here. So Wave of Conviction, Combustion, and Arcane Surge. And that's going to apply enough Ignite and damage to be able to get through Act 1 pretty seamlessly. And then Act 2, you're going to continue with that, and then Act 3, you'll switch to Ethereal Knives, which is basically the go. And this is also mentioned in the leveling section here. So yeah, once you get to Act 3, you'll take Shaper of Flames. But anyway, we'll just continue to go through the tree. So from this point, then you're going to move to Act 2, and so you're going to move up and you're going to get Elemental Overload. Now this is important because eventually you will be able to take this through stacking Spell Suppression and taking the Mastery point here. Critical strike chances increased by chance to suppress spell damage, and that's going to give you the ability to start critting, and then you'll be able to get a 40% increased amount of elemental damage, which will apply to your ignites from this. We then take Acrimony, we take Holy Fire, and we come down and we start building into our life nodes. Then we go to Act 3, we take Fire Mastery and we start stacking Dot, we take Purity of Flesh, and then we move up and we get Breath of Flame, and we start stacking our Fire Dot by Act 3, which will really start ramping up the damage. Now, by Act 3, you'll get access to Shaper of Flames, and this is when you can switch to Ethereal Knives, and then you'll be doing a fair bit of damage. And then beyond this point, Act 4, and then we start stacking Cold Damage, Breath of the Rime, and we start moving into the Herald buffing, because we're going to be running Herald of Purity and Herald of Ash in Act 4. And then Act 5, we start expanding out. We take Discord Artisan, and then we don't need to do anything else from this point. We just continue to progress. And then Act 6, we continue to build this tree out for reservation reduction. We don't do that. We don't need to take those nodes down in Sovereignty yet. And then we continue to move across until we get Eldritch Battery by Act 6, and this makes our ability to sustain skills a little bit more sustainable. With less chunk on the mana, and then we come down and get Searing Heart, which increases the ignite speed of which, or the speed of which ignites affect enemies, and we also get Fire Mastery and recover 2% of life from this point onwards. Then in Act 7, we come down, we get our Jewel Socket, we grab our Cruel Preparations, we take our Presage, which gives us increased reservation efficiency for our Herald skills, and then in Act 8, we're going to come down and get Influence and start stacking mana reservation efficiency. We'll also grab Sovereignty at this point as well, so we can start stacking more auras like Determination. And actually, that was Act 7, we do that as well. And then Act 9, we start moving down into this Written in Blood tree. And then finally, by the end of Act 10, we want to have Instinct, so we can have a good chunk of Spell Suppression. At this point, we'll have like 22% chance without itemization, but if we switch this up here, we'll have somewhere around 45% spell suppression without having to craft it on any items, and then we'll be able to proc our critical strike chance by our spell suppression chance as well. So, 45% spell suppression chance, and then critical strike chance is increased by spell suppression chance. So we start to crit. And we get 8.7% crit on that basis. So anyway, this tree will be provided in the description below, and as you would have seen, I have footage of as I was leveling up as well while I've been talking too. And that's basically it for leveling. Now, the one thing, once you get into Axe, the first thing you want to start doing is balancing your resistances like usual, and push your resistances up into max cap. Get your ascendancies. Your second ascendancy you're going to get is Shaper of Storms, and then basically you'll work to Mastermind of Discord and Heart of Destruction. So that's going to give you a decent chunk of damage as well as defense as well where possible. And having enemies constantly shocked increases the amount of damage that you do to enemies with your ignites as well. But that's it for the leveling tree. So all of this will be in the description. Now buffs coming off the patch notes we'll talk about next. Okay, so once you've leveled the tree and you've done the sort of medium amount of leveling that you need to do, as I spoke about in the mechanics, you really start to look at like min and maxing the build, and this will be the end game version of the tree that we'll talk about here. Now, you'll have the medium tree that I've given you and is a target to sort of try and achieve, and the reason why I explain that first is that's where we want to get to for mapping. But this is where we want to get to pure end game. And so there's a whole heap of trees you can pick from. You can look up different variations. This gets to about this much damage, and the configuration on this tree, you know, flasks are active, you're chilling, igniting, and shocking enemies. Obviously, ignite and shock are off the ascendancies, and chill's just somewhere baked into the build. And then beyond that, we have convergence as well, which is going to enhance our damage, and our highest damage output is fire. And the reason we have chill is because we do cold damage. We don't fully convert our cold damage, so we do a little bit of cold damage, which will then chill. And then basically, you'll go down. Enemy is Guardian and Pinnacle boss, yes. No other changes here. Is enemy ignited? Is the enemy on scorched ground? And this will come from our boot our boot implicit that we roll onto our boots to apply scorched ground as we move across the ground. Enemy is exposed to fire and enemy is shocked, so we don't have to change anything there. Our enemy is chilled as well, which doesn't really affect anything. It just sort of slows the enemy down a little bit. So, looking at the, I guess, tree here, basically no major changes occur in the tree when you get to this endgame point. A lot of this is around itemization, but we do get to the point where we'll need to, and this is a level 100 tree, by the way. So this is like pure endgame, so it's not 95. It's 100, and the way that you generally get to 100 is by doing 5 ways, and I might do a video on that at some point as well. It's usually like 3 div per 5 way, and then basically that's how you get to level 100 really easily, but I'll explain that in a future video. So anyway, then we start stacking up our large clusters. So we get Prismatic Heart, we get Sadist, and then our last Soriating Display we don't need. And then we start going Brush with Death, Flow of Life. This gives us health regeneration, and it gives us increased dot for fire. And then basically any jewels that you can get to buff you up. And then we run Purposeful Harbinger and Lasting Impressions, and this is going to significantly increase your damage over time, running Herald of Ash and Herald of Purity in this setup. And then obviously Storm Shroud is still involved in this build. And then basically Purposeful Harbinger, Lasting Impressions, Fan the Flame, and Circling Oblivion's pretty important, so enemies around you catch Ignite and continue to catch Ignite. And then basically we've got some reservation efficiency nodes in here as well that buff you up, and a pretty expensive Watcher's Eye. Well, actually, that's not even an expensive Watcher's Eye. That's pretty okay, that Watcher's Eye. Anyway, so that's basically like your true endgame tree. There's not a lot of deviation from the leveling tree at all. So there's not a lot of respecking that you need to do, just a touch when you get to like an endgame. But as far as skill setups go, so you're going to be running in your helmet Hydrosphere, Flammability, Arcane Spram, and Flame Surge, and then you're going to map that to like Q. I'd usually map that to, and then run your Arcane Spram to just nuke enemies. Then we run Malevolence on a Divine setup, Divine Blessing setup, and then we also run Haste. And the reason why this is sustainable is because this then uses a pretty decent amount. It's got a pretty decent amount of ES built into the build. I think ES wise we have 1200, so we can sustain casting those. And then obviously because we've got Eldritch Battery, then we've recharged that constantly as well, so it's all good. So then we have Flame Dash, Defiance Banner, Herald of Ash, Molten Shell. Molten Shell you map to your move button generally. And then Ethereal Knives is set up. So this is when we start to look at all Awakened Gems, and we have a level 4 in power. Discipline, Grace, Determination, Herald of Purity, and Hatred are all set up in a 6-link setup. And the reason why I sort of looked at this tree and went, this is really cool, is because funnily enough, this actually uses a Colossal Mallet. And the way that you can get to this is you can have synthesized mods on the Colossal Mallet, and realistically, like, enemies you kill have a 25% chance to explode. Super expensive, right? That's like a lot of Divine, but a higher probability to get that for cheap on a Colossal Mallet than anything else. And then basically you're going to then craft onto this with like fossils at the end of the day, to try and push the crafts up to get cast speed, damage over time, +1 socket to gems, and then you're going to just multi-craft using your multi-craft on your Crafting bench to get +2 to socketed supports. Now this is a really expensive item, but as noted, this is like pure endgame. And obviously moving from leveling through to the intermediate tree through to endgame, these are, you know, 3 different levels of play. Now, if you can't do this, then you can just go good old-fashioned bow and quiver, which is another alternative, and that'll allow you to have a 6-link and then the quiver as well. And the 6-link bow will be subject to the skill tree changes or the skill tree addition to the item as well. So, you know, similar to this, you'll be able to do the same. This is just a cheaper way to do it if you wanted like different mods. But I thought this was like a really trolly way to play this character, and so I really like it. And also running around with a mallet throwing ethereal knives just seems like a lot of fun. So that's why I included it here. Now, key items that you will need. As noted, pretty much the target for every rare item is going to be spell suppression where you can get it. Avoidance where you can get it, and then basically any other elemental resistance stats. And then basically Skin of the Lords, you want Magebane, because Magebane then allows you to stack more spell suppression. Magebane is down here. So that then gives you 1% chance to suppress spell damage per 15 dexterity, and there's like 162 dex on this character, which isn't crazy, but it gives you more ability to do that. And then Gloomfang, set up with Charisma. You don't need the implicits on this. That's just going to a whole different level with double corrupting. Polaric Devastation, absolutely you need, and you want it on the left ring socket because that's going to apply apply Ash to enemies for 5 seconds when you ignite them. And that's going to slow enemies down, and it's also going to inflict more damage to them. Now, Replica Emberwake you'll also need because ignites, while they don't last as long, Polaric Devastation pushes that back up by increasing the duration by about, like, was it 15 to 20%, something like that. But you also have reduced ignite duration using Replica Emberwake, which is also going to give you a significant increase to your rate of which ignites can be inflicted. And you would also want to see if you can increase that ignites you inflict deal damage X amount faster by qualitying this ring as well. And then belt, you're just going to use a Stygian Vise, go for all your stats that you need. Abyssal Jewel, you're going to try and get shock avoidance, because shock avoidance in combination with your Storm Shroud is going to buff you up significantly and give you all avoidance. And then basically flasks, you're good to use pretty much any flask. Taste of Hate. So there's no, even in this, there's no Bottled Faith in this. You could put a Bottled Faith, and that's actually going to do more damage again. But you're going to have to compromise on one of these sort of stats here as well. So you could get, what I would do is actually just get rid of Quicksilver Flask if you didn't need it. But it depends on what you're playing. You don't need Quicksilver Flask down in Delve. Yeah, you would actually want to use a, not a Jade Flask, the other flask, your Quartz Flask down in Delve if you're playing this down in Delve. And then basically, you know, this does use Impossible Escape. You don't need that. Leth Pride, and then basically that's about it. And that's your endgame setup. Alright, so I hope I covered off on enough in this build. All the trees that I've discussed will be in the description below. Obviously the leveling tree plus the leveling guide and commentary. This video is more or less to give you a guide of how to play this character, and in the most robust way that I can sort of put this together to provide as much detail as possible. Is this a good build to play? Absolutely. I know MBX played a EK Ignite build at the start of last league and was super powerful. One of the advantages of playing Ignite builds is it does make boss killing a significantly easier activity, because you just hit the Ignite, run to the corner, and then let them die. And that's one of the other reasons why a lot of people played this build. Will I be playing this build? Probably a second build. I was looking originally to play this as League Starter because I'd done tests on it and I was really happy with it. My experience in leveling this build is one of the easiest leveling builds ever. And then basically the endgame scaling was relatively cheap to level up as well. But beyond that, I'm actually looking at, so you guys know, and there'll be a Theory Crafter video, Blazing Salvo Juggernaut, which I thought was pretty trolly and funny, and I'm not going to recommend from League Start. I will put content out there to say and disclose that I'm going to play this from League Start, and this is the League Starter guide for this, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun because of the changes to the itemization skill tree systems that's being added in. I reckon there's going to be a really good path to absolutely making it either unkillable or just a ridiculous build that's going to excel at Delve and excel at Uber killing. Anyway, If you like this video, like and sub. If you got questions below, hit me with them. Always up for positive discussions down in the comments. Anyone who wants to be negative, quite frankly, can. Sorry, I like to be crude about that because, you know, a positive community is a constructive community at the end of the day. This video will be included in my curation list as well for anybody who's interested. And that video will be out a little bit later tonight, hopefully. Anyway, until next time, like and sub to the channel, follow the Twitch, and I'll see you guys later.